We live in a fantasy world now. Reality has been destroyed.
This is the time that you really need to pay attention.
The probabilities are overwhelmingly on gold's side. That is the best environment to see gold increase its value.
Welcome to Palisade's Gold Radio. I'm your host, Tom Bodrovics. Joining me today is Bob Moriarty, founder of 321 Gold and 321 Energy. He was also a Marine Corps fighter pilot in Vietnam. Bob, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
I would say absolutely the same thing, Bob. You and I always have some very, very interesting conversations. And this morning for me, this afternoon for you, before we hit record is absolutely no exception. And I'd love to touch on some of those subjects with you today for our audience. But I thought we could try and start by trying to get a grasp on this time in world history and really what is at stake. What are some of the big themes, the big risks that you see at this point in time? And I think you and I need to kind of go through a list of that to really elucidate and help everybody try to consider many of these pieces of the puzzle, because there are so many things that we're facing at this time in history. And I don't think markets and or most people appreciate the number of risks, the number of very detrimental, again, pieces of this puzzle that are really very profound.
That's a good way of putting it, and I'm glad you emphasized that. You had mentioned that earlier, and I noted that I wanted to comment on that. It's scary to me with as many critical events that are going on right now. The average person that I deal with is totally oblivious to it. We've got the United States trying to start World War III in Ukraine. We've got Israel trying to start World War III in Gaza and Lebanon. We've got the Houthis who have brought Israel's economy to a standstill. We've got China, Taiwan, and we'll talk about this, but I've got an intelligence report from a guy who is an intelligence professional for 40 years. And he says China is going to invade Taiwan between the 20th and 22nd of this month. But let's talk about danger overall and danger specifically. Between now and the election, that's 8 weeks exactly today, is probably the most dangerous period that I've lived in my entire life. The deep state has made it crystal clear they don't want Trump, and they're going to do everything in their power to stop him, including assassination. And then you've got the situation between now and the 20th of January, where the number one question in every American's mind, everybody in the world's mind actually should be, who the hell's running the United States? And I'll tell you who's not running the United States. It's Joe Biden. Okay. We don't even know who's running the United States. Somebody's running it. Are they crazy? I think they probably are. So we're in interesting times. We're in interesting times financially. We're in interesting times in geopolitics. Is there even going to be an election? There's a debate tonight, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But we're in scary times. It's that simple. Is the stock market going to crash? The stock market likes crashing in October. NVIDIA has lost $1 trillion in value. So we got interesting things to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we start by kind of laying out a little bit of analysis of the conflicts that are going on around the world and that intelligence report that you received, and what that can mean for the escalation of many of these conflicts and this tension in the world.
We talked about that, and I think there are 5 significant conflicts going on. You have the obvious conflict between the United States and NATO against Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. And the Ukrainians have lost that war since the very first month. They are not going to defeat Russia. It's an existential war for Russia, and they are prepared to die. Americans would never understand this, but the Russians lost 27 million people in World War II, including Putin's older brother. So war is something every Russian is familiar with. Now, that's not true of Americans. We had, I think, 425,000 people died in World War II, and 58,000 people died in Vietnam, and some meaningless 5,000 or 10,000 have died since then. So war is a way of stimulating the economy for the United States, which is why the military-industrial complex wants it. But we've got the Ukraine war. We've got Hezbollah versus Israel on the border of Lebanon. We've got Hamas versus Israel in Gaza. We've got Israel versus the West Bank in the West Bank. We've got the Houthis, who have literally tied up Yemen, and what could be the smoking fuse of China versus Taiwan. Jake Sullivan, who I think is the national security advisor, just made a trip to China to talk to the head guy in China. And a Chinese general took him aside and said, look, you need to understand this. We are going to invade Taiwan. Now, that's not the way the Chinese conduct diplomacy, but Sullivan's trip to China was a total, absolute insult to the United States. And we'll get into the intelligence report. Somebody sent me an intelligence report 2 weeks ago. The guy who sent it to me is a 40-year professional intelligence person. He was in the military. He was with the DID, the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. And he said, based on his open source sources, there will be an invasion that'll start on the 20th and go whole hog by the 22nd of September. And of course, the real issue there is once somebody lights the bonfire, what does Israel do? What does Russia do? What does NATO do? The United States is landing F-35 aircraft on Swedish highways just to make sure they can do it. They have sent F-16s that could be used for nuclear weapons to Ukraine. The Poles have said they want 300,000 NATO troops in Poland. And sooner or later, China and Russia are going to look at it and say, you know, these guys are not bullshitting. They're serious and they want World War III. Why don't we just give it to them? Mm-hmm. I spent enough time in combat that I could judge people. I'll just flat tell you, I wouldn't mess with Putin. Putin is a grade A badass. And if you think you're going to cakewalk over Putin, it just ain't going to happen. So all this nonsense in the U.S. press about how the Ukrainians are winning and how Hamas is losing and how Hezbollah is getting their butt kicked, none of it's true. It's a total lie. Everything we're being told now is a lie. So you got on one side the United States, the EU, NATO. On the other side, you've got Russia, China, Iran, and potentially North Korea. It's an exceptionally dangerous time, and where the United States should be providing leadership, nobody can even say who's running the country. So it's a dangerous time. if the stock market crashes in October, and it kind of smells to me like a stock market crash has started, you could have total chaos in the next month or two.
So let's go over a little bit more of that intelligence report and what it means. This really involves China and Taiwan. And I'd like to also get your opinion on kind of the logistics and how they can play out in one side's favor or the other. I've had it told to me that the US is in very strategic locations to be able to help defend Taiwan. And that really could present major challenges for the Chinese. So how does that, advantage or position play in as well to this situation?
It's total rubbish. Okay. The United States absolutely does not have the ability to fight wars on three fronts. And it's fighting a war in Ukraine, and it's fighting a war supplying Israel. And there's no way they can defend Taiwan, period. Mm-hmm. Now, the Chinese made it clear, okay, Taiwan is part of China. The position of the United States legally is Taiwan is part of China. And if and when the Chinese decide they're going to take Taiwan, they are going to take Taiwan. Now, as a guy who spent 20 months in combat, flew over 800 missions, I'll just flat tell you, we have nothing that we could hurt China with, period. It's too big a country, okay? What have they got, 1.3, 1.4 billion people? Mm-hmm. That's like Israel versus Iran. Nobody ever asks the question, wait a minute, what's the size of each country? Iran's 10 times bigger than Israel. How is Israel going to defeat Iran? And the answer is the only possible way they could do it is using nuclear weapons. And they don't even have the ability to deliver the nuclear weapons because of the distance involved. So what they've been trying to do for months is to drag the United States into conflict and let the United States fight the war for them. But the United States lost every war they fought since World War II, and they didn't even win World War II. Now, if you watch the news and read the history books, oh yeah, the United States and England, we won the war. We didn't win the war. The Russians did. The Russians killed 80% of the Germans. Okay, so D-Day and Normandy and Patton, it was all nonsense, all rubbish. It's for the history books. It's not reality. The United States is not prepared to fight a real war, and Russia is prepared to fight a real war. And Iran proved back in April that they can attack targets in Israel anytime they want to. So if Hezbollah gets their act together, and Iran gets their act together, and China gets their act together, and Russia gets their act together, North Korea gets their act together, the world will change in a weekend. This is not a war that is going to last for 20 years. This is a war that's going to last for 3 days.
So, Bob, how does all of this, kind of play into the timing as well of the US election? I mean, I remember somebody asking one of those Alexa devices, those Amazon Alexa devices, who is going to win the 2024 US election? And, mark it as insignificant or not, the answer that it gave was that the election wasn't going to happen because there is going to be some type of deferment because of war. So, taking that possibly silly example into account, how do you think this, again, plays into the US election?
Well, interestingly enough, and you and I did talk about it, and I said, if there is even an election, we don't know that there'll be an election. What a great way to prevent Trump from becoming president is to not allow an election. The Biden administration has let something over 10 million people, illegal immigrants, into the United States. In Texas alone, over 3 million people have registered to vote without providing photo ID. Okay. And many of those, if not all of those, are going to be fraud. There was just a shooting event, I think, in Missouri, where half a dozen people were shot on a highway. And the guy running Venezuela said, yeah, we cleared out the prisons and the mental institutions. And we sent all those guys to Mexico to cross into the United States. Of the 10 million people who have come into the United States that we admit to, there have to be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of saboteurs, assassins, gang members, people who don't have it, have good intentions for the United States. The United States has 400 million guns. It's easy to get guns there. So all we would need in the next week or two or month is about 50 or 100 shooting events, random shooting events, okay? And then just cancel the election, declare martial law. Something bad is going to happen. I don't know what it is. In intelligence work, there's two things that you're interested in. One is, what are the enemy's capabilities? And the other is, what are the enemy's intentions? And certainly, of the 10 million people, the capability of getting 100,000 potential terrorists is very high. And the question has to be, what is their intention? And we don't know yet. Okay, that's an open-ended question. But with hotspots in Ukraine, hotspots in Lebanon, hotspots in Gaza, hotspots in West Bank, the ICJ, the top court in the world, just came out and said that Israel's actions in the West Bank are illegal. The settlements are illegal, and they have been ordered to leave the settlements and to compensate the Palestinians. And the ICJ, the people who signed the UN Charter, are legally obligated to enforce the actions of the ICJ. And of course, you never heard about it. Nobody in the United States has heard about it because the mainstream media isn't about to say that everything that Israel is doing, it's illegal. Israel is losing the war. They've been losing the war. And the reason they're losing their war is their arrogance. And their arrogance could lead easily to World War III and the defeat of both the United States and the destruction of Israel.
Bob, this also ties in with the idea of the fourth turning, right? The end of a possible empire, or the possible end of an empire. So,
actually, no, that's not what the fourth turning is about.
Well, I know
you have four cycles, okay, and the fourth turning is the crisis phase, and it doesn't suggest end of the empire. What it suggests is you either go full-blown totalitarian, which is happening right now, or you go to freedom. So it's not a prediction of end of the empire, but you can look at the history of the world. Every country that has ever had the world's reserve currency, and that would be the UK, that would be France, that would be the Dutch, has had it for about 80 years. And the United States has had it for 80 years. And if anybody listening to this doesn't see the corruption in the United States, they need to drink some more coffee. They need to wake up.
So where I was going with that is to ask what your opinion is on the possibility of a black swan between now and the election too. As you said, it's basically 2 months away exactly.
0.
Oh, okay.
There will not be a black swan. There will be 5 or 10 black swans. There are so many black swans flying around right now. The Houthis are one, Lebanon's one, Gaza is one, Ukraine is one, Taiwan is one. There are so many things that could happen. Even NVIDIA, okay, for world's first $3 trillion company, lost $1 trillion Okay, that was real money to some people, and I believe the debt system of the U.S. and the world is coming to an end, and the Western-based debt system is going to consume itself because there's no other alternative. In France, 58% of the GDP goes for taxes. That's insane.
Mhm.
Okay. In Spain, when Spain was getting all the gold and silver from Central and South America, I think the taxes were 10%. We have destroyed the middle class, and the stability of any society is based on the size of the middle class. And you could see riots all over the world now. And I think it's all connected, and it's all part of the fourth turning. The head of Telegraph flew into France and was arrested, and he was released on bail, but it was made clear that he would not be allowed to leave France. And then the FBI turned around and issued an arrest warrant too. And of course, what he's guilty of is exactly the same thing as every significant social media, like Twitter. The government wants access to that information, and if they don't get access to that information, they'll shut you down or they'll lock you up. Brazil shut down Twitter.
So it's just more, more steps in that direction, let's say, of totalitarianism, as you were saying, right?
We have some really scary things in place. The UN and the WHO has tried to force through an agreement that the WHO would have the ability to supersede all of the governments in the world. And if they declared a medical emergency, all of the governments in the world would have to concede to it. And we should have learned the lesson. I can't mention the word, but we should have learned the lesson from the virus of 4 years ago, that everything we were told. We are doing things today that have never occurred before in history. And I can't figure out who it was. It wasn't Fauci. It was the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab just came out and said, and frankly, I saw that from the get-go. I was one of the most vocal people against the actions of the government because it was clearly all wrong. And anybody who thinks we paid the price for that, no. We are still paying the price, and we're going to be paying the price until hundreds of millions of people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that we've never faced something like this in history, but I think it was far more overt and brutal rather than as subversive as this time in history was.
Well, you can look at things like the Black Plague that killed as many as a third of the people in some of the European countries, including England. However, that was through a lack of medical information. Okay, they didn't realize that it was the fleas on the rats. They thought it was the rats. It wasn't the rats, it was the fleas. Mm-hmm. So a lot more people have died in percentage terms, but this was biowarfare. Okay, this was deliberate, and it's not only deliberate, it's still going on.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, what do you think all of this ends up meaning for gold?
I hate it when you ask questions like that. A prudent person would look at the world, would educate himself or herself, and say, gee, there are some black swans flying around that could crap all over me. I should take some precautions. Mm-hmm. And precautions would include having some cash. Precautions would include having your vehicle fully fueled. precautions would include having 6 months food if you've got the storage space. And if you actually wanted to protect your wealth, it would include owning some gold. Gold, let's not talk about gold as money. There are guys who really get carried away. Gold is what is money? I hate hearing that. Gold is an insurance policy against chaos. So if by chance you happen to see chaos on the horizon, which means you've been paying attention to this thing, if you see chaos, it would be a good idea to own some gold. Not gold, in Timbuktu, but gold where you put your hands on it.
Mm-hmm. Bob, like as an obvious extension of that, what do you think this time in history also means for the mining stocks? Let's leave out the rate cutting environment for right now, but owning equities in companies like this, what does that mean for that type of, let's say, asset or speculation as well?
In relative terms, gold shares are the cheapest to gold they have ever been. And it's been an utter disaster for people owning mining stocks. And that's from the biggest pieces of crap to the very best run companies out there. It's been a total disaster. However, that's about to change. And if we don't blow up the world in the next 2 weeks, gold shares are going to be the best and safest place to invest, literally for probably the next decade. They will be a place of safety.
So what do you think explains that undervaluation versus the physical metal that is, sitting right near its all-time highs? It seems like we've been promised that gold mining shares are going to react, they're going to perform, and yet for the most part, we haven't seen them react in the way that one would expect to gold's rise over the last year.
I will admit I am just as guilty as any of the other cheerleaders out there, because I have believed that gold shares would react, and they clearly have not. Mm-hmm. However, if you post this chart, I think it'll make it clear what's going to happen in the near future, because quite bluntly, it's going to be the only safe place to be. I think the Dow Jones and the S&P is selling for 13 times book value. That's a lot.
Mm-hmm. So then when we take into account that I believe it's just over a week from when we're speaking here on September the 10th, how does that rate cutting environment that the Fed is likely to announce also play into this environment for gold mining shares? Is this typically a time when they perform?
Here's what you need to do. You need to separate gold from gold shares. And I'm going to be posting a piece tomorrow where someone has written a really excellent article about who's controlling the price of gold. And I'm convinced, and he's made a very convincing argument, the Chinese control the price of gold right now. But the price of gold mining shares is separate from gold, as you've seen. I mean, we got $2,500 gold today, and gold mining shares are still getting whacked. Mm-hmm. So, like the other cheerleaders for gold shares, I've been wrong, but mm-hmm. I think that's about to change. I hope it's about to change.
And why? What is your reasoning that it's about to change, Bob?
All things change.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Things go from being absurdly overpriced to absurdly underpriced, and then they change.
Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking about gold mining stocks, gold companies, whether it be discovery plays or producers, do we need to be, let's say over the last 10 years, do we need to be in exciting stories that are making headlines or discoveries instead of just looking at the fundamentals of the company?
I think the mistake has been to buy into the hype and the potential and to ignore the reality. There are some gold stocks that I look at that are just so well run and so absurdly priced. I'm trying to shift from the stories that people were telling that have had years to do something and have never accomplished anything. I'm trying to shift out of those and into the real movers and shakers.
And what do you mean by a mover and shaker?
Something like West Red Lake Gold, they announced 54 grams intercept, I think, of 4.3 meters today.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's pissed off at West Red Lake because Pure Gold went bankrupt and took $1 billion with it. And everybody's forgotten that the Madison mine and mill is $350 million mill that would cost 650 or 750 million to put together today. Brilliant management, great deposit, and Pure Gold was worth, I think, $1.2 billion at one point, and West Red Lake Gold, I think, is worth 150 million or something like that. West Red Lake could go up eightfold just to be where that deposit was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Bob, on the other side of the problems for the economy that we're seeing and all of this, let's say, economic chaos, how do you see the path for inflation going forward? Are we going to see a second wave like we did in the later 70s?
Yep.
And how
I don't think there's any choice. We are going to see more inflation. If you were to summarize Warren Buffett's theme of investing, what has he bet on for 30 or 40 years?
I would say value and revaluation of sectors of the market that he sees as being undervalued.
Nope.
Okay.
Inflation. He looked at the history of money in all countries, and he said, if I bought quality stocks and just sat on them, mm-hmm. I would make money. And he's had this incredible return. I think it's 19% per year for like 453 years. Mm-hmm. And it's because he was betting on inflation. I mean, the really funny thing is that Warren Buffett is a one-theme investor. And what's he investing in right now? Because this is really good.
I don't know. You tell me.
Cash.
Well, I was going to say, to take the other side of that argument, if he's investing in, or let's say in or against inflation, then why wouldn't he be buying gold? Or why doesn't he like gold?
I'm certain Warren Buffett's father was a senator, I think, from Nebraska, and he was a very positive gold guy. And Warren Buffett makes fun of gold all the time. He says, why would you dig it out of the ground and take it and put it in a vault and sit on it? And of course, the answer is that everybody needs reserves. So it would actually surprise me over the next 5 years if he did not decide gold actually is a good investment. But he's investing in cash right now because he sees the stock market in general is about to fall off a cliff.
Mm-hmm. and not investing in cash because of its, inflationary protection, but more so just to have dry powder, right? And to be out of
yeah.
the drawdown, as you say, that's very likely.
There is risk, obviously, in an inflationary environment in cash, but what he's figured out is there is a far greater risk in investing in the stock market, where I think 40% of the value of the S&P is in either 5 stocks or 7 stocks. We are at the greatest extreme in stock market history, and we're going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. So, to contrast that, Bob, does that mean that, much of the commodity complex itself that has been, relatively undervalued is going to be a beneficiary of that, that transfer of liquidity that comes from many of these zombie companies and growth stocks that have been such a beneficiary for the last couple of years?
Commodities are severely underpriced, and I believe after a blip downward, when the hand grenade goes off, okay, everybody around it gets whacked. But when the dust settles, you figure out who survived. In relative terms, commodities and gold are cheaper than they've ever been, and that's about to change. And in relative terms, gold stocks compared to gold are the cheapest. Can you check your email to see if you can open up the chart that I just sent you?
Yep.
Beautiful. That is a great chart. And obviously, I'm going to put it where people can expand it. But relative to gold, you've got gold at an all-time high, and relative to gold, the gold shares have not come along for the ride. They're going to, and they're going to for probably a 10 or 15-year period.
So I can't quite see, how far does this chart go back in years, Bob?
Well, it's one of those good news, bad news stories. And the good news is your eyes are better than my eyes. And the bad news is your eyes still aren't good enough. I don't know, but I'll tell you, I think at the top of the sine wave, I think would be 1980 or thereabouts.
Okay, I think, yeah, I'm trying to see. It says something 52-year bearish, started something 1960s. We'll try and get a better resolution chart, but I mean, obviously the general idea is, again, as you said, this rebalancing idea of, or maybe a better way to put it is reversion to the mean, right?
Yeah, you always get deviation from the mean and you get revision to the mean, and that is what I say. Things always change. I just expanded my copy, and the top of the sine wave was around 1965 to 1970.
Okay.
So you could see that in relative terms, gold compared to gold has been going down for, what is that, 50 years, 57 years, 59.
Yeah, gold miners compared to gold.
Yeah. And I believe, I could be wrong. Everything I say, I could be wrong. But I believe that gold mining shares, especially good gold mining shares, and there's a lot of really great companies right now, will be the place to be.
So is there any, I mean, obviously it's a little bit of a trite question, but is there a handful of tips or things that you look for to identify a great miner, as you're talking
about? After the last 5 to 10 years, I think the very best tool you could use for picking stocks would be a dart.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say a
have,
telephone, maybe.
I have followed great story after great story after great story that management has to run it straight into the ground. And I just sit here and look at it and say, how could they screw something up that was that easy? And the answer is you work at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So is this more of a case of just almost index investing in the sector because the tide will be, or all of the boats will be lifted by the tide?
Strange enough, that would be a very good, if I had invested in the ETFs or I had invested in the 3 or 4 good resource funds, I would be a lot better off than I am. There's some really good fund management out there, and they are going to be the leaders when gold shares go up. And frankly, it's a one decision. Okay, you only have to do one thing. I have visited somewhere between 400 and 500 mining projects, and if you sent a monkey on 400 or 500 mining trips, he would know a lot about geology. And I've seen companies that you couldn't possibly screw up, blow up. And quite bluntly, I don't think I'm smart enough to measure management. And I'm not sure that there's anybody else that I know that's been smart enough. When the tide goes out, all the boats end up on the mud flats.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, is there a bit of a hierarchy in your mind to, let's say, seeing the most returns? You know, we've talked a lot about gold stocks, but it's often said that, you know, when silver catches up, it moves a lot further. Obviously, you know, understanding that we need to watch that very carefully because it can be far more volatile. But let's say if you invested in SILJ, the junior silver miners versus the bigger cap gold miners, is that, you know, at the right time, possibly an investment with a larger possibility of return than the big gold miners?
Yeah, of course. But the problem with it is, what's the right time?
Mm-hmm.
There's a guy who runs a very influential gold site, and we had a discussion 20 years ago where he was convinced silver was going to the moon, and you should invest in silver and only in silver. And gold was about $280 an ounce, and now it's 2,500. And silver was $4 an ounce then, and now it's $28. The silver miners have not done particularly well. I think they will in the future. I think that silver is a sleeper. I think that both silver and platinum are the most attractive of the investment metals. But if, this is a big if, I'll give you a theory I got that I don't spend a lot of time talking about. My belief is that you cannot have an honest economy without honest money.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to cure the financial problems of the West, you need to drop the debt-based system, and you need to go back to honest money. If you go back to honest money, then people start investing for rational reasons, mm-hmm, rather than speculating. The banking system and financial system of the West has turned into a giant casino. If you go into a casino on a regular basis, you're going to lose money. So we've got to get out of the casino mode and into the real world economics mode. Mm-hmm. And that's very difficult. I mean, Jesus, you look, you're in Canada. I mean, take a look at the price of real estate in Canada. It's insane. Mm-hmm. We can't afford it. Okay, I think to buy the average house in the United States, you need an income of 139,000 a year. Very few people have an income of 139,000 a year, but that's what you need to buy the average house, not an expensive house. Mm-hmm. So we need to redefine, we need to redraw the financial system. And the only way that's going to happen is to have a massive crash. It's coming.
Mm-hmm. So, Bob, why platinum? Is it because of the rarity of it? What is so attractive to you about platinum?
It's cheap.
Again, that reversion to the let's say historical mean, or reversion to the value versus the dollar.
Yeah, platinum's always had a premium to gold. Mm-hmm. Platinum was discovered in Colombia, I think, in 1720 or 1719, something like that. They didn't realize that it was a separate metal. The Indians mined the rivers for gold, and they always threw the platinum back, and they thought it was undeveloped gold because the specific gravity is so close. But platinum has far more uses, and platinum is going to do the same thing rhodium did. Rhodium went from $600 to, I think, 28,000.
Well, and I've heard it said before too that rhodium tends to spike ahead of market crashes, which, I mean, I'd like to see somebody test that or back test that versus market crashes to really analyze it. I've asked a couple times why that happens, and nobody has given me a satisfactory answer.
You want the good news or the bad news?
Hey, we're here for both, Bob.
Now, the good news is that if somebody knew that, it would be very valuable to pay you. And the bad news is it ain't me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always fun to try to maybe get tidbits of information on why any of these things happen and kind of put that together through time with different people's views. And I think that's what I try to bring to everybody on this show by interviewing many different voices and not just one side of the argument, so that we can kind of piece together the world by triangulating many different opinions.
Yeah, well, I happen to be a contrarian, and I look for charts like the chart that I sent you. Mm-hmm. That chart makes it absolutely clear for the last 57 to 59 years, the value of gold shares to gold has been going down. And you can draw a very significant sine wave and say that should change. All things change. And I've managed to pick a lot of tops and bottoms because I'm not looking at the fundamentals. Okay, I don't care about the fundamentals. I care about people's opinion. Rhodium was so boring, you couldn't give rhodium away. Mm-hmm. I started buying rhodium, I think, at $1,200 an ounce, and sat there and watched it drop to $600 or $700. And it was the most boring metal in the world. And then all of a sudden it took off like a rocket ship, and it went 28,000. I went, holy cow. But I think there's a good chance, if you look at the 300-year history of platinum, it's always held a premium to gold. And platinum's 900 and change right now, and gold's like $1,600 more. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, Bob. Well, I really appreciate you walking us through all of these subjects and how you see them. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our audience to consider or to mull over before we wrap up?
I would highly recommend. I'm not predicting World War III in the next 2 weeks. However, this is an exceptionally dangerous period of time, and it would be a great time to be prepared for chaos that we know occurs on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think again, I always feel like a broken record saying many of these things, but this recency bias of peace that we have had, I don't know that we can expect that to stay the same or markets to stay relatively non-volatile for the foreseeable future. There's just so many things, so many knives to step on at this point. I think something is likely to happen, and there are just too many possibilities for that at this time, right?
Yes, and if you're going to crawl through ground glass, you're going to get cut.
That's a great way
I
to put
just
it.
made that up.
Well,
I thought it was kind of
makes
cool.
sense. Yeah. Of course, for anybody that wants to keep up on many of these topics, whether that be gold, whether it be news, whether it be geopolitical escalations, that's all available on your site, 321gold.com. And of course, Bob, I really appreciate your time. Always a pleasure to speak with you, sir.
Tom, we always have good interviews and good chats. Thank you for the time. Anytime you want, I'm available.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
This podcast is for general informational purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be taken as investment advice. Guests on this show are not compensated for their appearance. Listeners are urged to educate themselves and make their own decisions. Do not base any investment decisions on the information contained. To view our full disclaimer, please visit our website.